back in Geneva, this time for crisis meetings. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry with the UN envoy Staffan de Mistura. The talks he's been chairing in this city are now close to the point of collapse. The reason, the onslaught in Aleppo.
Both sides, the opposition and the regime, have contributed to this chaos. And we are working over these next hours intensely in order to try to restore the cessation of hostilities and at the same time to raise the level of accountability that will accompany the day-to-day process of implementing this ceasefire.
After all that's happened, do you trust the Russians now?
We are reinvigorating, actually, together between the Russians and Americans in the UN building the Operation Center. In other words, we are preparing the mechanism, but the mechanism needs a political will. Otherwise, we would have only a mechanism, but that is actually being started today.
Mr. de Mistura will now travel to Moscow to meet Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. It's perhaps significant he was not here in Geneva, as he, along with Mr. Kerry, is one of the architects of the current talks process.
The original deal was this: John Kerry would bring the Syrian opposition to the negotiating table. Sergei Lavrov would deliver the Assad government. A UN Security Council resolution at the end of last year was supposed to provide the right environment for serious talks, bringing a halt to the violence, aid to besieged areas, and the release of detainees.
The Saudi foreign minister, also in Geneva to see Mr. Kerry, says the government of Bashar al-Assad is to blame for breaching all of those obligations.
There is only one side that is flying airplanes, and that is Bashar al-Assad and his allies. So they are responsible for the massacre of women, children, and the elderly. They're responsible for the murder of doctors and medical personnel. And this situation, any way you slice it, will not stand. The world is not going to allow them to get away with this.
As Mr. Kerry heads home, the focus of diplomacy will now move to Moscow. The big question is whether Russia is still really invested in the political process, or is instead giving Assad time to continue his military assault. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Geneva.